The coldness of the betrayal arrived in a sterile, manila envelope. It wasn't a sudden, violent storm, but a quiet, creeping frost, chilling the very marrow in my bones. It wasn't delivered by a stranger or an enemy, but by my own flesh and blood, my daughter, Samantha. Inside that envelope was a lawsuit, filed in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, petitioning the court to have me declared mentally unfit, stripping me of my autonomy, and most cruelly, robbing me of my home. They wanted to take everything. If you believe in justice and a mother's unbreakable spirit, smash that like button, subscribe, and stay with me as I tell you how I fought back. The paper felt unnaturally heavy in my hands, each word a lead weight pulling me down into a dark I hadn't known existed. Incompetence, cognitive decline, a danger to herself and her own financial interests. The legal jargon was familiar, a language I once spoke with fluency, but now it was twisted, weaponized against me. I sank into my late husband's worn leather armchair, the one that still held the faint scent of his pipe tobacco and Old Spice, and I read the documents again and again. I was trying to find a mistake, a clerical error, anything to explain how my daughter, my Sammy, whose tiny hand I once held as she took her first wobbly steps on this very floor, could orchestrate such a monstrous act. The petition was thorough. I had to give them that. It was signed by Samantha and supported by a medical evaluation from a Dr. Alistair Evans, a man I'd never met. According to him, I was suffering from a rapidly progressing form of dementia. He cited instances of forgetfulness, confusion, all meticulously detailed with dates and times. They were lies. All of them. Cleverly constructed half-truths, twisted from ordinary moments. The time I misplaced my keys. Now it was evidence of a deteriorating mind. The day I called Samantha by her childhood nickname, Sunny? Proof of my disconnection from reality. My home. This house in the Boston suburbs was the true target. It wasn't just brick and mortar. It was a living museum of our family's history. Robert and I had bought it 50 years ago, our hands trembling as we signed the deed. We'd raised Samantha within these walls, her height marked in pencil on the kitchen doorframe. Every creak of the floorboards was a memory, every sunbeam a ghost of a shared laugh. After Robert passed, the house became my sanctuary, my fortress against the grief that threatened to swallow me whole. It was all I had left of him, and it was what I had promised to our grandson, Leo, Samantha's own son. That was the trigger. I knew it instantly. 2 weeks ago, during our Sunday dinner, I'd mentioned updating my will. Leo, my son-in-law Mark's boy from his first marriage, was a sweet, struggling artist who had been more of a child to me in recent years than Samantha ever was. I told her I was leaving the house to him, ensuring he'd always have a stable foundation. Samantha's smile had frozen on her face, a brittle porcelain mask. She'd wanted me to sell it, to give her the cash to pour into her failing fashion boutique, another in a long line of her expensive, transient passions. I had refused, gently but firmly, explaining that a legacy was worth more than a financial bailout. She had argued, her voice rising with a familiar, petulant tone. She saw the house not as a home, but as a pile of equity. She saw my sentimental attachment as a foolish obstacle. I never imagined her anger would curdle into this calculated legal assault. As I stared at the court summons, the silence of the house was deafening. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that had always soothed me, now seemed to be counting down the moments until I lost everything. The woman who had built a career on navigating the cold logic of the law, on fighting for others in civil court, was now trapped in a nightmare of her own. My own daughter had not only disowned me as her mother, but she had also erased my identity, rebranding me as a senile old woman. The first tear that fell wasn't one of sadness. It was of pure, unadulterated shock. The initial shock soon gave way to a tidal wave of grief so profound it felt like a second widowhood. I wasn't just mourning the daughter I thought I had, I was mourning the mother I had been. For 3 days, I did nothing. I drifted through the silent rooms of my home, each object a testament to a life of sacrifice she had so casually dismissed. I'd touch the faded velvet of the armchair where I'd rocked her to sleep, night after night, humming lullabies until my own throat was raw. I'd trace the scratches on the dining table from the science fair project I'd stayed up until 3 helping her finish. This house wasn't just my sanctuary, it was an archive of my love for her. My mind became a relentless slideshow of memories. I saw myself, a young, ambitious lawyer in a sea of men, just making a name for myself at a prestigious Boston firm. Then I saw Samantha, a toddler with a fever, crying for her mama. I remembered the choice I made, the one millions of women make. I stepped back from the partner track, opting for a less demanding role so I could be there for school plays and scraped knees. I never once regretted it. To me, it wasn't a sacrifice. It was a reallocation of my heart. I poured all the ambition I had for my career into her, celebrating her every minor victory as if it were my own, convinced she would grow into a compassionate, brilliant woman. Where did I go so wrong? The question echoed in the hollow spaces of my heart. I remembered her teenage years, the endless demands for designer clothes and expensive trips, the way she'd dismiss me with a roll of her eyes if I dared to talk about my own life or work. I told myself it was a phase. Then came adulthood, when her boutique, Samantha's Style, was just a dream. Whose retirement savings took the first big hit to secure the lease? Mine. When she needed a co-signer for a business loan she couldn't possibly afford, whose name went on the dotted line next to hers? Mine. I had enabled her. I realized with a sickening lurch, I had shielded her from every consequence, cushioned every fall, and in doing so, I had raised a woman who believed she was entitled to everything and grateful for nothing. The lawsuit's fabricated evidence felt like a personal violation, an attempt to rewrite our entire history. The accusation of forgetfulness stemmed from a family dinner where I couldn't recall the name of an actor in some silly movie she was talking about. Now it was a symptom of dementia. The claim of erratic financial decisions was my refusal to give her another $50,000 to rebrand her failing store last month. It wasn't an act of prudence. It was proof I couldn't manage my own affairs. She had taken every act of love, every moment of my life, and twisted it into a weapon against me. She was trying to gaslight me into a grave, and the court was her chosen shovel. The worst part was the loneliness. Who could I tell? My friends would be horrified, sympathetic, but they wouldn't understand the unique agony of being betrayed by your own child. It was a primal wound, a severing of the most fundamental human bond. On the third night, as a cold rain lashed against the window panes, I looked at a photograph of Robert and me on our wedding day, young and full of foolish, beautiful hope. The grief finally broke. I wept until my body ached, for my husband, for my daughter, for the woman I used to be. The sobs were a violent, purging storm, washing away the shock and the sorrow, leaving something else in their wake. By the fourth morning, the tears were gone. I woke with an unfamiliar clarity, the kind that comes after a raging fever breaks. The grief hadn't vanished, but it had crystallized into something hard and sharp. It had become fuel. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and saw not a frail, confused old woman, but the reflection of a stranger I hadn't seen in 30 years, Her eyes were puffy and tired, but behind the exhaustion, a familiar fire was rekindling. It was the look I used to get before a major trial, a look of focused, unyielding resolve. Samantha had made a critical error. In her greed, she'd forgotten who I was. She remembered the doting mother, the soft touch, the open wallet. She had forgotten Helen Moore. Esk, the woman who had once made a senior partner at a top law firm cry during a cross-examination, a vow formed in the quiet of my heart, as solid and unbreakable as granite. I would not go down without a fight. I would not let her erase me. I would not let her steal my husband's legacy and my grandson's future. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about my name, my sanity, my very existence. The pain of her betrayal was still a physical ache in my chest, but now it was accompanied by a cold, righteous anger. It was a warrior's anger. I walked from the bathroom to the back of the house, to a room I rarely entered anymore, Robert's study. It had been my office, once upon a time, before I'd turned it over to him after I scaled back my career. Since his death, I'd kept the door closed, unable to face the silence and the memories. Today, I opened it. A thin layer of dust covered everything. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and leather. It was a time capsule of a life I'd left behind. My old law books lined the shelves, their leather spines unbroken. My diplomas from Boston College and Harvard Law hung on the wall, slightly askew. I ran my hand over the heavy oak desk, my fingers tracing the faint scratches where I'd once spent countless nights drafting briefs and preparing arguments. It felt like shaking hands with a ghost who was very much alive. I sat in the high-backed leather chair, the same one I'm sitting in now, and felt a profound shift within me. The fog of sorrow lifted, replaced by the sharp, analytical mind I had worked so hard to cultivate. The victim was gone. The lawyer had returned. My strategy would not be one of emotion or pleading. It would be one of cold, hard facts. It would be a case built on evidence, a meticulous deconstruction of Samantha's web of lies. She wanted to play in the legal arena? Fine. But she was an amateur stepping into the ring with a seasoned professional. She had no idea the kind of fight she had just picked. I would not be the weeping mother in the courtroom. I would be the architect of her downfall. My first move wouldn't be to hire a lawyer. My first move would be to become one again. I pulled a fresh legal pad from a drawer, the paper a pristine, hopeful yellow. At the top, in crisp, firm letters, I wrote 2 words, Moore v. Moore. The war had begun. The study, once a mausoleum of my past, transformed into my war room. The first order of business was to think not like a mother, but like opposing counsel. I had to dissect the petition, line by line, identifying its strengths and, more importantly, its weaknesses. Samantha, or rather her lawyer, had built a case on 2 pillars: my supposed cognitive decline, backed by Dr. Evans's report, and my alleged financial irresponsibility. Both were lies, but lies presented under the color of law are formidable. My job was to demolish those pillars until nothing remained but dust. I started with the timeline. I took out my old journals, my calendars, my bank statements, a lifetime of meticulous record-keeping that Samantha had always mocked as one of my boring old lady habits. That habit was about to become her worst nightmare. I cross-referenced every single incident her lawsuit cited. The day I supposedly got lost driving home from the grocery store, my credit card statement showed I'd also stopped at the dry cleaners and the post office, all in a logical sequence. I even had a receipt from a coffee shop near my home, time-stamped just 20 minutes after my grocery purchase. I wasn't lost. I was running errands. The accusation of leaving the stove on? I remembered that day clearly. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, had come over in a panic because her cat was missing. I'd shut off the burner under my simmering soup and rushed out to help her search. We'd found the cat, Mittens, hiding under her porch an hour later. A quick call to a grateful Mrs. Gable, and I had a witness who could provide a sworn affidavit to dismantle that lie. One by one, I chipped away at the narrative they had constructed. Each piece of evidence was a caricature of the truth, a funhouse mirror distortion of reality. The core of her case, however, was Dr. Evans's medical assessment. It was the pillar made of granite, without a medical license. I couldn't disprove his diagnosis directly, but as a lawyer, I knew you didn't always have to attack the fortress head-on. Sometimes, you just had to cut off its supply lines. I needed to investigate Dr. Alistair Evans. The internet made the initial reconnaissance easy. He was a geriatric specialist with a private practice in a swanky part of town. His website was slick, filled with smiling photos of happy, elderly patients. But a few deeper searches, using legal and medical databases I still had access to, started to paint a different picture. There were 2 malpractice complaints against him in the last 5 years, both settled out of court. More telling, a search of public financial records revealed he had 2 mortgages on his home and a significant lien from the IRS for unpaid taxes. Dr. Evans was a man under financial pressure, a man who might be susceptible to persuasion. How much would it cost to buy a man's professional integrity, I wondered. How much did Samantha pay him to sign his name to a fraudulent diagnosis that would ruin my life? Proving bribery was a high bar, but I didn't need to prove it just yet. I just needed to find a crack. I called my own physician, Dr. Lena Hansen, a woman I trusted implicitly, and scheduled a full physical and cognitive exam, explaining the situation in broad strokes. I needed a baseline, a clean bill of health from a reputable source to counter Evans's report. As I worked late into the night, the house was silent around me. The grandfather clock chimed 2, then 3. I wasn't tired. For the first time in years, I felt a surge of purpose, a familiar thrill of the hunt. In the solitude of Robert's study, surrounded by the ghosts of my past, I was meticulously gathering the threads of Samantha's deceit, and I had just found the first one to pull. The path to dismantling Dr. Evans's credibility began with my own medical records. Every citizen has the right to their complete file, a fact I was counting on. The next morning, I drove to Dr. Evans's clinic. I didn't make an appointment, I just walked in, a polite, smiling older woman in a sensible tweed coat, and presented his receptionist with a legally flawless request for my entire patient file, a file that shouldn't exist, as I had never been his patient. The request itself was a trap. If they had no file, their lie would be exposed. If they produced one, it would be a work of fiction I could tear apart. An hour later, a flustered nurse handed me a thin folder. Inside was a fabrication, a medical history built on the lies Samantha had fed him. But in his haste to create a convincing file, Dr. Evans had made a critical mistake. He had included a set of baseline blood test results, dated 6 weeks prior, presumably to establish a before for my supposed rapid decline. He had forged the lab report, even putting the name of a prominent Boston lab, Quest Diagnostics, at the top. It looked official. It looked damning. It was the key that would unlock everything. That afternoon, I visited Dr. Hansen for my scheduled evaluation. She put me through a battery of tests, from memory recall and problem-solving exercises to a full neurological exam. At the end, she looked at me over her glasses, a warm but professional smile on her face. "Helen," she said, "you are as sharp as you were when I first met you 10 years ago. Your cognitive functions are well above average for a woman your age. Whatever this other doctor has claimed, It is medically baseless." Her words were a balm to my wounded soul. I had her prepare a comprehensive report, a direct counter-narrative to Evans's fiction. Then, I took his forged lab report to the actual Quest Diagnostics headquarters. I didn't go to the front desk. I had done my research and made an appointment with their head of records compliance, citing a potential case of medical fraud. I showed the man the report. He scanned it, typed the requisition number into his system, and frowned. "This is our letterhead," he said, "but this requisition number doesn't exist in our system for this date. In fact, we have no record of a Helen Moore being tested through our facility at all in the past 5 years." He looked at me, understanding dawning in his eyes. "This document," he concluded, tapping the paper, "is a forgery." I had it. The undeniable, concrete proof, not just of a faulty diagnosis, but of a criminal act. Forgery. Medical fraud. Conspiracy. I asked for and received a sworn affidavit from the compliance officer. Holding that piece of paper in my hand felt like holding a lightning bolt. It was the weapon I needed. The journey home was a blur. I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time, the affidavit on the passenger seat beside me. The betrayal still hurt. It would always hurt. But now, the scales of justice, the ones I had devoted my life to, were beginning to tip back in my favor. I had the doctor. His treachery was on paper, signed and sealed, and if I had him, it was only a matter of time before I had my daughter. The hunt was getting closer. With the forged lab report and Dr. Hansen's clean bill of health, I had the shield. Now, I needed the sword. I needed to catch Samantha in her own trap, using her own words. A deposition was scheduled for 2 weeks' time, a standard pre-trial procedure where her lawyer would question me under oath. I knew they expected to face a confused, weeping old woman they could easily trip up. They would be unpleasantly surprised. But before that, I decided to engage in a bit of psychological warfare. I needed to make Samantha overconfident, to believe her plan was working perfectly. I started by playing the part she had cast for me. I made a confused phone call to her, asking what day it was and whether I had missed an appointment. I could almost hear the smug satisfaction in her voice as she patiently helped me. "It's okay, Mom," she'd said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "We all have moments like that." I knew she was documenting every word, every feigned slip, to feed to her lawyer. Let her, I thought. Let her build her ladder of lies higher and higher. The fall would be that much greater. Next, I baited the hook. I sent her a carefully worded email, making sure to include a few typos to seem befuddled. I told her I was thinking of selling some of Robert's old antiques to free up some cash, because I was worried about my finances. I mentioned a specific, valuable grandfather clock in the hall, the very one that chimed away the hours in my war room, and said I was having it appraised. This was a direct appeal to her greed. The house was the long-term prize, but the idea of quick cash from the estate's assets would be irresistible to her, especially with her boutique hemorrhaging money. As I'd hoped, she took the bait. A few days later, she called me. I let it ring 4 times before picking up, answering with a slightly dazed, "Hello?" She was all business. "Mom, I heard you're thinking of selling Dad's things. You can't do that. You're not in a position to make those kinds of decisions right now when it's all part of the estate." The word estate was key, as if I were already dead. This was the moment I had prepared for. I had a small, high-quality recording device, perfectly legal to use in a 2-party consent state like Massachusetts when you inform the other party. "Samantha, I feel like you're not listening to me," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "For legal purposes, I need to inform you this call is being recorded so I have a clear record of our conversation." There was a brief pause on her end. "Fine. Whatever. Mom, she snapped, impatient. Her arrogance was my greatest ally. She didn't believe I was capable of doing anything with the recording. I don't understand, honey, I said, playing my role. Why are you doing this? I'm fine. Dr. Hansen says I'm fine. Her response was chillingly clear and precisely what I needed. Dr. Hansen doesn't know what she's talking about. We have Dr. Evans, a specialist, who says you're a danger to yourself. This is for your own good. Just let me handle the finances. Once the court agrees, I'll sell the house, pay off my business debts, and make sure you're in a nice, safe place. Pay off my business debts. She had admitted it. The motive, the raw, ugly truth behind the facade of concern. It wasn't about my well-being. It was about bailing out her failed business with my life savings. I saved the recording, labeling it Exhibit A. The web was woven. The spider had walked right into it and confessed. Now, all I had to do was wait for the deposition and let her entangle herself completely. The day of the deposition arrived, cold and gray, mirroring the mood in my heart. We met in a sterile conference room in her lawyer's downtown office. Samantha sat across the long, polished table from me, a look of pitying concern expertly painted on her face. Her lawyer, a slick man named Mr. Davies with a Patek Philippe watch and an overly confident smile, set up his recorder and began. He started with soft, gentle questions, his tone patronizing, designed to make me seem fragile and confused. Mrs. Wetmore, could you tell us what you had for breakfast this morning? A poached egg on whole wheat toast and a cup of black coffee, I answered calmly. And yesterday, the same. I've had the same breakfast for the last 12 years. It was a habit my husband and I shared. He smiled, undeterred. Of course. Now, about your finances. You've recently refused to provide your daughter, Samantha, with a loan for her business. Is that correct? I refused to give her a gift of $50,000. Yes, I have supported her business ventures generously for over a decade. This particular request felt fiscally irresponsible. I used the term deliberately. Mr. Davies raised an eyebrow. Irresponsible? Or did you perhaps just forget? It's not uncommon for people your age to misplace things, to lose track of financial matters. This was my opening. On the contrary, Mr. Davies, my financial records are immaculate. For example, I have here a detailed ledger of every dollar I have given Samantha since she turned 18. It totals, to date, $342,000. I also have the profit and loss statements from her boutique for the last 3 years, which I obtained legally as a co-signer on her business loan. They show a consistent and accelerating pattern of loss. My decision wasn't based on a failing memory, but on sound financial analysis. I slid a neat folder across the table. Davies' smile faltered as he opened it. Samantha's face paled, the mask of concern cracking to reveal the panic underneath. She hadn't expected me to come prepared. She had expected a victim, not an opponent. Mr. Davies shifted gears, turning to my medical state. Let's talk about Dr. Evans' report. He notes a significant cognitive decline. He mentions an incident where you got lost for several hours. That is a fabrication, I said, my voice steady. On the day in question, I was running errands. I have time-stamped receipts from 3 different establishments, all within a 2-mile radius of my home, that account for my time. Would you like to see them? I placed another folder on the table. Samantha stared at it as if it were a snake. She started to fidget, tapping a pen against the table, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. For the first time, she looked directly at me, and in her eyes, I saw not greed or pity, but pure, unadulterated fear. She was realizing that the frail old woman she thought she was suing was gone. Mr. Davies, clearly flustered, pressed on, grasping at straws. "My client is worried about you. Mrs. Moore, she is doing this out of love." I let a beat of silence hang in the air before I responded, my voice dropping, low and clear. "Is that what she told you? That this was about love?" I looked straight at my daughter. "Or did she tell you that it was about paying off her business debts? That she intended to sell my home and put me in a nice, safe place?" The color drained completely from Samantha's face. She knew I was quoting her. The pen dropped from her hand and clattered onto the table. The confidence in the room had evaporated. "Mr.?" Davies stared at me, his lawyer's mind racing, trying to figure out how I knew that. The first cracks in their case had appeared, and they were growing into chasms right before their eyes. The deposition ended shortly after. They had nothing, and they knew it. The day of the court hearing felt like the coldest day of the year, though the sun was shining. I walked up the stone steps of the Suffolk County Courthouse, not as a defendant, but as a combatant. Samantha and Mr. Asa Davies were already there, standing in the hallway, their heads together in a hushed, anxious conversation. When Samantha saw me, she flinched. She looked haggard. The confident cruelty of the past few weeks replaced by a brittle, nervous energy. When our case was called, we filed into the courtroom. It was smaller than I remembered from my professional days, but the feeling was the same. The solemnity, the weight of the wood, the air of consequence. I took my seat at the respondent's table. Mr. Davies and Samantha sat at the petitioners. The judge, a stern-faced woman named Judge Eleanor Vance, entered and took her seat. Case 23 CV00874, Moore v. Moore, the bailiff announced. "Petitioner, are you ready to proceed?" Mr. Davies stood. "We are, Your Honor." "And the respondent," Judge Vance said, looking over her glasses at me. "Mrs. Moore, I see you are representing yourself. Are you certain you wish to proceed without counsel?" "I am, Your Honor," I said, my voice clear and strong, echoing slightly in the quiet room. "I believe I am uniquely qualified to handle this matter." A ripple of surprise went through the small gallery. Samantha stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. This was not part of her plan. She expected me to have a hired gun, a stranger who would argue on my behalf. She did not expect to be facing me directly. "Mr. Davies began, his voice smooth as he laid out their case. He painted a picture of a loving daughter forced to make a difficult choice, of a mother lost in the fog of dementia, a danger to herself. He presented Dr. Evans' report as their cornerstone of evidence. It was a compelling performance, full of heartfelt sighs and sorrowful glances in my direction. When it was my turn, I walked to the lectern, not with a stack of files, but with a single, slim folder. "Your Honor," I began, my voice calm. "My daughter's petition is not an act of love. It is an act of financial desperation. It is not a shield to protect me, but a sword intended to steal my home and my legacy. The entire case rests upon a foundation of lies, and I am here today to demolish that foundation, brick by brick." I started with the small things, just as I had in the deposition. I presented the affidavits from my neighbors, the time-stamped receipts, the detailed financial records. With each piece of evidence, I could see Mr. Davies's composure fraying. He objected. He interrupted. But Judge Vance overruled him each time, her eyes fixed on me with growing interest. Then, I moved to the main pillar of their case. The petitioner's argument hinges almost entirely on the medical opinion of a Dr. Alistair Evans, who I have never met. They have presented his report as fact. But what if that report is not just wrong, Your Honor? What if it is a criminal forgery? A gasp went through the courtroom. Samantha shot to her feet. That's a lie. Sit down, Ms. Moore, Judge Vance commanded, her voice like cracking ice. Continue, Mrs. Moore. I placed the affidavit from the head of compliance at Quest Diagnostics on the lectern. This is a sworn statement from the lab Dr. Evans claims to have used. It confirms that the blood test results included in my file are fake. The requisition number is fabricated. They have no record of me. This document, the very basis for his diagnosis of a rapidly progressing condition, is a complete and utter fraud. I let the words hang in the air. The room was silent. Samantha had sunk back into her chair, looking as though she might faint. Mr. Davies was frantically shuffling through his papers, his face a mask of disbelief. He had built his entire case on a lie, and I had just exposed it in open court. The shockwave was just the beginning. I hadn't even brought out my sword yet. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the frantic rustle of Mr. Davies's papers. Judge Vance stared down from the bench, her expression unreadable but intensely focused. Mrs. Moore, she said, her voice dangerously calm. These are extremely serious allegations. They are, Your Honor, I replied, and I have the evidence to support them. I then called my own doctor, Lena Hansen, to the stand. She was a poised and credible witness. She presented her own comprehensive evaluation, detailing my excellent cognitive health and systematically refuting every single medical claim made in Dr. Evans's report. Mr. Davies's cross-examination was weak and ineffective. He was trying to fight a tank with a pea shooter. After Dr. Hansen stepped down, I took a deep breath and played my final card. Your Honor, the petitioner has claimed this action is motivated by concern for my well-being. I would like to submit into evidence a recording of a phone call between my daughter and myself, in which she reveals her true motives. Mr. E. Davies leaped to his feet. Objection! Improper foundation! We don't know if this recording is authentic. The petitioner was informed the call was being recorded, Your Honor, I stated calmly, and I have an expert from a digital forensics firm ready to testify to its authenticity if needed. Judge Vance looked at Mr. Davies. Objection overruled. Proceed, Mrs. Moore. I played the recording. The speakers filled the courtroom with my daughter's voice, sharp and greedy, stripped of all its phony sympathy. Pay off my business debts and make sure you're in a nice, safe place. The words hung in the air, an undeniable confession. Samantha buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. It wasn't sorrow. It was the agony of being caught. Mr. Davies slumped in his chair, utterly defeated. There was nowhere left for them to hide. I turned to face the judge, my voice thick with an emotion I hadn't allowed myself to feel until this moment. A profound, aching sadness. Your Honor, this is not just about a house. This is about a daughter who was willing to have her own mother declared insane for money. She did not just sue me. She tried to erase me. She conspired with a doctor to commit fraud. She perjured herself in her petition, and she did it all with a smile on her face. I paused, then looked directly at Samantha. Our eyes met for a fleeting second before she looked away, unable to face me. I do not ask for pity, I said to the court. I ask for justice. I ask that this fraudulent petition be dismissed with prejudice, and I ask that the court refer the evidence of medical fraud, forgery, and potential conspiracy to the district attorney's office for a criminal investigation. The silence that followed was absolute. Judge Vance looked from the pile of evidence on her desk to the defeated lawyer, to the weeping daughter, and finally to me. She removed her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose, a long, weary sigh escaping her lips. When she spoke, her voice was cold steel. "Ms. Moore," she said, her gaze fixed on my daughter. "The evidence presented here today is not just compelling, it is overwhelming. Your petition is a grotesque abuse of the legal system and a horrifying betrayal of filial duty." She banged her gavel, the sound cracking like a gunshot in the silent room. "Petition denied. I am referring this entire matter, including the conduct of Dr. Alistair Evans and the petitioner, Samantha Moore, to the district attorney. This court is adjourned." It was over. I had won. But as I watched a bailiff approach Samantha's table, the feeling wasn't triumph. It was the hollow, aching emptiness of a victory that had cost me my own child. The aftermath of the trial was swift and brutal. Samantha and Dr. Evans were indicted on charges of conspiracy, fraud, and perjury. The local Boston papers picked up the story, splashing headlines like, "Daughter sues to steal inheritance. Unwittingly faces mother's legal wrath." My daughter, who had craved the spotlight for her fashion boutique, was finally famous. But for all the wrong reasons. Her business collapsed, her credit was ruined, and her fair-weather friends vanished overnight. She pleaded guilty to avoid a longer sentence and was given 2 years of probation, a hefty fine, and mandatory community service. We have not spoken since the day in court. Sometimes I wonder if she feels any remorse, but I know, deep down, she is likely only sorry that she got caught. For me, victory was a quiet, somber affair. The day the verdict came down, I walked back into my house, the house I had fought so hard to keep. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed, marking not the countdown to my ruin, but the beginning of my new life. The silence was no longer deafening. It was peaceful. I made a cup of tea and sat in Robert's armchair, the slim folder from the trial on the ottoman in front of me. I had reclaimed my home, my name, and my sanity. The ghost of Helen Moore, Esk, had not only returned, but had been reborn, forged stronger in the fire of betrayal. A few weeks later, my grandson, Leo, came to visit. He wrapped me in a long hug, his relief palpable. "I was so worried, Grandma," he whispered. We spent the afternoon in the garden, pulling weeds and talking about his art. Seeing his gentle hands covered in soil, I knew I had made the right choice. The house would be a foundation for his creativity, a legacy of love, not a treasure chest to be plundered for greed. News of my case spread through channels I never expected. I began receiving phone calls and emails from other elderly people, men and women facing similar nightmares with their own children. They were scared, confused, and felt utterly alone. They saw my story and found a glimmer of hope. I realized my fight was not just my own. My pain could have a purpose. I reopened a small private legal practice out of my study. I specialize in one thing, providing pro bono and low-cost legal counsel to senior citizens targeted by predatory family members. I fight for them. I empower them. I show them that they are not invisible, that their minds are still sharp, and that their lives still have value. I found my calling not in the hallowed halls of a Boston law firm, but in the quiet dignity of my own home, defending the defenseless. The pain of my daughter's betrayal is a scar that will never fully fade, but it no longer defines me. My name is Helen Moore. I am not a victim. I am a survivor, an advocate, and a guardian of legacies. And my work is just beginning. The battle is over, and the quiet has returned to my home. The grandfather clock still chimes, but its rhythm feels different now, a steady, reassuring heartbeat in a house that has weathered the worst of storms. justice. I've learned isn't always a triumphant, joyful thing. Sometimes it's a quiet, sorrowful necessity, a painful surgery to remove a sickness you never thought could grow so close to your heart. I reclaimed my life, but I lost a daughter in the process. Was the price worth the peace I now feel? Yes, it had to be. Because the alternative was to let a lie consume me, to be erased by someone else's greed. My victory wasn't in punishing Samantha. It was in refusing to become the helpless victim she tried to make me. It was in remembering the strong, capable woman I had always been. This experience has taught me that the deepest betrayals often come from those we love the most. But it has also shown me that within us lies a reservoir of strength we rarely know we have until we are forced to dig deep. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to find a strength you didn't know you possessed to overcome a personal crisis? What does justice truly mean to you when family is involved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories give us all strength. And if you found value in my story, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your engagement helps us continue to share these important narratives. Thank you for listening.